you're obviously known for some pretty serious perfectionist tendencies, but Blemish strikes me as an album in which perhaps you embrace and expand on mistakes. What do you think of that perception?
It's not so much mistakes as it's just being open to the act of improvisation in the studio and just going with it. You know, the work had the musical element had to reflect the emotional element, and the emotional element is pretty raw, pretty on edge. I mean, there's no concealment. It's a very vulnerable position to take as a writer and as a vocalist, and I wanted the musical support to mirror and reflect that same intensity and upfront honesty, if you like. So it seemed it would seem detrimental to the work to go back and try and polish, correct, remove the sonic blemishes, if you will, to try and give the work a polish that it really didn't need in this given context. And as each track was born out of improvisation, and that was generally created on guitar, whether it's myself or Derek Bailey, the initial basis for each track is a guitar improvisation. And so I just sort of went with that. I didn't question once I'd set up a sound on the guitar and I just started attacking it, that was it. That was going to be the performance. First take, there would be no second take. And that would be the basis for the vocal response. And I would sit down immediately with the guitar recording and respond lyrically to it, jotting down words and phrases, culling ideas from notebooks and what have you. And then again, taking that the next step and immediately responding melodically to the track with a set of lyrics. So it was all done very, very quickly. The basis for each track was created very, very quickly, and I didn't allow time for reflection. You know, is that phrase correct? Should it be there? Is it the strongest I can come up with in the context? I just went with whatever surfaced. That was the discipline. Whatever came to the surface, that's what I was going with. And I found the process very liberating in that respect. One other thing I should say is that I've been working on the retrospective material for Virgin for a number of years, remix of Damage and so on and so forth. And by the time I got into the studio to write new material, I really felt somewhat creatively dead. It'd been stifled for so long while I was working on these other projects for Virgin and while I was building my studio. I didn't really know what was there. I didn't really know what was inside and what needed to be expressed. I had ideas, and I'd been carrying the idea for Blemish for almost a year in terms of just the general outline. But I really had no idea what would happen when I sat down to write the material. So when it did surface the way that it did, and it was as immediate as it was, it wasn't. If nothing else, I felt there was an integrity, an honesty, a truthfulness in the work, a vulnerability. And to top it off, I don't think I'd heard anything quite like it before, and that gave me that in a sense justified the work for me.
In reference to what you said about eliminating the elements of reflection and questioning, in some ways those are a couple of the hallmarks of your creative process previously.
Yeah, that's true. I guess I was more interested on this outing with the intensity of the commitment to the work, the emotional commitment to the work. If I paused to think about what I was writing about, maybe I wouldn't feel comfortable. Maybe that degree of vulnerability is just would be just too out there for me to feel comfortable with. I mean, there's a vulnerability in my work generally, but this was taking it a step even further than that. And if I was to pause and really reflect upon it, maybe I would have second thoughts about taking this approach. So, and as I said, also there was just the rush of creativity was exciting. So although I'm dealing with rather negative, profoundly moving emotions of loss and disillusionment, there was also this excitement that, well, this has. I guess I should also say that I was allowing myself to delve very, very deeply into very personal feelings that were almost impossible for me to tap into in my real life, if you like, in day-to-day living. I closed the studio door and allowed myself, in the safety of that environment, to really penetrate deeply into these emotions and see where they would take me. I'm not sure why it felt safe to do that, but it did feel safe. It certainly was cathartic, but it was liberating too. Because by the time I finished that album, I put the finishing touches to it, I felt like I'd risen above much of what the album was dealing with. It had helped me live through the experience by opening to it 100% and allowing myself to feel the depths of those feelings.
How would you contrast the way you approach this record with Dead Bees on a Cake?
I mean, Dead Bees is in a sense the antithesis, in a sense, of what I've done here with Blemish. In that it was very considered. I mean, going back to the original writing stages of a work, that is very spontaneous and very quick, generally. Anyway, I don't labor over the material in the writing process. But the recording process was a slow and drawn-out one, not one that I didn't intend it to be that way, but it just happened that I couldn't get the performances I was looking for. We had a lot of technical problems creating the record, so there was, it was drawn out over a very long period of time because it was a very eventful period in my life, and I was getting sidetracked away from the work very often. So in a sense, it is a work that I return to again and again. To fine-tune and to look for the spark that I felt was missing in the original performances through editing, through my own interpretation of what was needed as a musician. So it was just far more considered. It was far more in tune with the work I'd created prior to that time, in the sense that it was a very controlled work.
Did you seek to work with Derek Bailey as a way of challenging your music-making conventions?
Oh, absolutely. That was definitely part of the fascination with working with somebody like Derek. I tried to enter into that free jazz arena once before in my life, around 1990, 91, something like that. I did a session with the pianist Keith Tippett, and I failed to find a foothold. I failed to find a way into the work as a vocalist, as a lyricist, and I had to put it aside. But it was still an area of a genre, if you like, of music that fascinated me, and I know that I could never enter into the spirit of the work on the same footing as those performers, because I'm as a vocalist, I have limitations, and I like to work with lyrics, so there needs to be time for that reflection to be able to pull a lyric together before I can actually respond to somebody else's work. So, to backtrack, I heard Derek's album, Ballads, and that when I heard that album, I thought I could suddenly see that there was a place I could get a foothold, that that was a possibility. There was something there that would allow me to work with this material as a vocalist. And during the year that I carried the kind of vague idea for the project that was to become Blemish, I listened to a lot of Derek's work, and I felt that there was a sort of sense of dislocation in the way that he played that would help reflect the emotional content of what the album was going to contain. And again, the challenge, just the immense challenge of responding to that kind of performance as a vocalist, as a lyricist, was exciting. It's as simple as that. I wanted the challenge. In fact, when I spoke to Derek just before he went ahead and did the session, he was in London at the time. I was in the States. I wasn't present at the session, but I said, I'm really looking for a challenge here as a vocalist. And he said, "Oh, don't worry, David, you'll certainly be challenged." And it was a, just a wonderful experience to work with that material. Also, I needed a counterpart to the material I was working with in the studio. I think it would have been, I think the material needed to be broken up in a way with these other passages that Derek provided as a musician.
That almost sounds, I suppose, the antithesis to the way you've worked with several other musicians in terms of, say, how a Mark Ribot or a Bill Frisell contributed to Dead Bees on a Cake. It seemed you were using them in response to your own ideas.
I mean, there's a slight resemblance to the way that I worked with Bill on the dobro pieces. There's a slight similarity there, because the recording of the dobro pieces came at the end of a 2-day session where we've been working, focused on existing material that Bill was contributing to, and at the end of the session there was just this opening where I asked him to improvise on the dobro, and so he performed about 7 short pieces for me to respond to at a later date. So I mean, that maybe that was the seed that was planted that, again, ultimately allowed me to find a way of working with Derek's style of playing.
You seem attracted to a certain type of guitar player. Derek Bailey, Mark Ribot, Bill Frisell, David Torn, Robert Fripp, like sort of an avant-garde, sort of askew approach to the instrument.
I'm attracted to unique voices. I mean, I love the instrument, obviously, and it's just trying to find someone that can act as a counterpart to my own contribution as vocalist. I'm drawn to the trumpet. I'm drawn to the guitar, and in recent years, the guitar has become more and more pervasive in the work. So yeah, it's really just the uniqueness of voice, and as always for me, it's an emotional intensity that I look for in the performance, and just all of the players that I've worked with have that uniqueness of sound, of voice, and the emotional intensity and integrity to support what I'm doing.
People have likened you to Miles Davis in terms of your talent for creating unique groupings and selecting very, very unique musicians. Did his approach serve as an inspiration to you?
Well, Miles is an inspiration on a number of levels, but let's say it wasn't a conscious inspiration. That he had this ability to pull together wonderful groupings of musicians and really bring the best out of them. For me, it was the frustration of moving from working within a band. When you're working in a group, you have 100% commitment, if you're lucky, from all of the musicians involved, producing the best quality of work you can. Because everybody's integrity rides on it. Everybody's interest and love and passion is right there. It's involved in the work from the word go. And what worried me was when I moved away from the security of that environment to work as a solo artist. I worried that I wasn't going to get that same degree of commitment from the musicians I was working with. I mean, I'd occasionally worked with session musicians in the past, and I'd also heard, stories about certain session musicians that could come in and really kind of give you what you were looking for in a superficial way, but not the emotional intensity that would give the work some kind of justification or profundity, or layers of intensity and emotion. And the way I overcame that was to recognize in the arrangement of the material, as I was arranging the material prior to entering into the studio, recognize certain connections between a given composition and a body of music by a particular artist. So I often give the example of hearing the sound of John Hassel's trumpet as I was arranging Brilliant Trees, and a kind of a light going on, thinking, wow, that would be incredible. Is it okay to do this? Is it okay to then ask that musician to become a part and parcel of the work? Will they make the same connection that I've made between their body of work, or an aspect of their work, and this particular composition. And so that was a bit of a leap of faith for me, and it has worked, I mean, incredibly well. It's an intuitive response to my own work, and as I say, a fraction, a part, or a body of work by another artist. And it's been so often the case that if the musician is willing to participate in the recording session, they do find this link, and ultimately, because of that, give something of themselves to the work. I mean, commit on a level that you possibly wouldn't get from working with a session musician where that same consideration wasn't applied. So that's really where it grew from, and that's been my guiding principle since.
You said when you're creating work, there is often a time when you feel you're at a point in your life when you have absolutely nothing to lose.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that a little.
Feeling somewhat creatively stifled and not knowing if there was anything there left to give, so not wanting to repeat oneself musically as a writer, as a lyricist, whatever, but just wanted to take a leap into the unknown, wanting to find a new vocabulary, not wanting to speak with the same tongue, if you like. It's just that kind of sense, absolutely nothing to lose, because I'm not going to repeat myself, and I'd rather just stop making music if there is nothing there. Okay, there's nothing there, let's move on. But, so there you have nothing to lose, just going to dive in the deep end and see what surfaces and go with what surfaces. And there's a great sense of freedom and liberation that comes with that open-mindedness towards the new work. It's only happened a few times in my life. I felt that to some degree when I started writing Tin Drum. I certainly felt it when I was creating Brilliant Tree. Kind of pivotal moment, if you like. There's an unlocking of potential. Maybe a broader view can be taken to the general direction your work can take. Just a broader view of who you are as an artist, I think. It just, suddenly there's an opening, and it's, again, it's all to do with intuition. It's not an intellectual understanding. It's a sense that anything can happen, and there's nothing to lose because you're not going to take a backward step. And in a sense, you're dissatisfied. You want to find a new means of expressing yourself, and it is an unlocking of potential it's tangible. You can feel it in the air prior to even starting the work, and I had a sense of that going into creating Blemish.
Well, how do you look back on Dead Bees on a Cake 3 years later?
Well, it's funny. It's an album that, I haven't listened to it since I created it. Although I toured the material, so it's still quite fresh in my mind. For me, there's some gorgeous pieces of music on it. Some of the best that I've ever created, and I felt at some point that I was at my most eloquent as a writer. Pieces like I Surrender and Wanderlust, and then there are a couple of pieces on there that were seemed to struggle to come into being, and again, where I couldn't quite compensate for the performances that I just felt that I didn't get, from some of the musicians involved, and so those pieces can sometimes feel slightly stagnant. They don't evolve as much as I would have liked them to. But outside of that, it's still a record that documents such an important period in my life, and in that sense will always be a valuable document to me. And it's a recording that I learned so much from, as a producer, engineer. I learned so much from the process of making that record. And it is also an album that is far more celebratory than any of the others that I've created, and is one of great optimism, and it is sort of fueled by love on so many levels that I don't think my personal impression of it will ever really dim.
You've recently joined the ranks of a multitude of prominent musicians who've chosen to go independent. Was that in response to the way Virgin handled Dead Bees?
Well, there was that problem. Working with Virgin was, you normally can work with somebody whether they like or dislike the work, but when there's the wall of indifference, it's really, really hard to work with that. And so we came up against this wall of indifference, and there was no way around it. And I just wanted out. I wanted my freedom again. I got so tired of walking the hallways of Virgin Records with a begging bowl, forever, please may I, and really not getting any kind of response. And so there was an enormous desire to break away from all of that. And the feeling was mutual. So finally, I was able to leave the company. Having been signed to a major label my entire adult life, there was a sense of euphoria, just like, I am absolutely free to move in any direction I choose to without having to justify it to anybody. And I didn't feel the desire to get back into that situation where there would need to be justification, or having completed the work, I would then have to go and persuade, someone else that this was a good, an interesting work, a good direction to take, and a viable investment for their company. I was tired of being a businessman, ironically, because then I'm about to start my own label. But in a sense, I feel liberated from all that. I felt far more the businessman dealing with a major label than actually creating my own and working with sympathetic people to have a similar outlook. So it was a necessity. I never for one moment thought of taking Blemish around to other labels to see if they were interested. I thought this is a step worth taking. It's a difficult record. Maybe the people that really want to hear it will seek it out. So it doesn't matter too much if distribution isn't set up at the initial stages of its release. And then just learn on a week-to-week basis just how this functions, how people find it, are they finding it? And we are learning, and it's a fascinating process. People come to us on a weekly basis. It could be a distributor from Japan, from Italy, from Germany, asking to pick the album up, and we can play with the decisions that need to be made at that point. And I guess there's a sort of spirit of adventure to it all. Nobody's panicking that we've only had this number of sales just yet or whatever. We're just thinking that we're just exploring the process and what it means to set up one's own label and to try and bring the audience to the work, if you like. It's a challenge, but right now it's a very pleasurable process of education. So we'll just see how that goes and see how that develops, and then I'll decide if it's the right route to take in the future. Hoping that it is. I'm optimistic that it is.
You and your brother Steve are a creative unit again. Tell me about the process of reconciliation that took place to allow that to happen.
Well, Steve's my brother, and no matter what you go through with family, you tend to resolve it at some point or another. And I always thought that would be the case with Steve. I think there was we hadn't seen one another for quite some time, and I think we both changed a lot in that time. And there was, I guess, a great deal of forgiveness. That simple. And what happened after that? I guess he made a small contribution to Dead Bees, and at that point the kind of creative door was open again. He became a part of the tours that I did following on from the release of that album, and I think it was through the touring together that the strong bonding of love resurfaced, a true appreciation of well, I'll speak for myself, a true appreciation of his talent and ability was still there, more so than ever. And I just thought, well, we failed to really achieve what we set out to achieve with Raintree Crow Project, and that was a big disappointment to me. And I wonder if it's possible to pick up the pieces as a duo and bring in other musicians into the project on occasion and see how it develops. That was the initial idea, and at this point we're just working as a team, writing, learning new technology to incorporate more electronics into the work, and really, I guess, taking our time to make sure that the first step we take in this new venture is a true step, is one that we'll want to build upon in the coming years. I value the solo work, and I guess it will always be the priority, our priority in my life. But I've also missed working within the context of a group, and the idea of one that evolves from project to project, can adapt from application to application. It still fascinates me and affords me opportunities that the solo work might not. So I'm hoping, that this work with Steve will evolve into that engine that can carry me through into different areas of work that my solo work might not.
The Japan back catalog and your solo catalog are being resurrected by Virgin again in September, which I assume means you're working with the label again in some capacity.
I'm working with primarily one person at Virgin EMI, and she's somebody that's been a supporter for many years now. And it was one of the few people that I enjoyed working with at Virgin in the latter years. It was really her doing, just pushing for the re-release of this material. And I want the material out there. I want it available. And so I agreed to work with the label to get it out there and get it back on the shelves again. So it's I don't have a large involvement in this. Really just down to selecting artwork and approving the remastering, and that's about it. So it's not a major commitment on my part, but I'm truly grateful that the work will continue to be available.
Are you involved in the expanded versions of the albums as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, there were a lot of suggestions, and I just basically edited them down to what I felt was appropriate. Yeah. On the whole, you can just take the original albums as they were. As a listener, I tend to be put off by all the extras that come with a re-release. I find them a bit of a distraction from the original work. But it's so much a part of what is done these days, and I've tried to just keep it down to just the bare essentials. We don't need to go into demos and live material and what have you. I just wanted to keep it very, very simple. Work that was directly related to the original album.
You once said that you don't listen to radio or watch TV, but rather you learn about what's going on in the world through the world of music.
The constant need for more information, what's going on in the world, but basically the same stuff is going on in the world. And you can tune out for weeks and months at a time and still know essentially what is going on in the world. There are pivotal moments in history where the intensity is turned up and there are some major decisions made in very short spaces of time. But generally that's not the case. Generally, human nature trundles on in the way that it always does, with the same issues, same problems surfacing all the time. It's not necessary, I don't feel, to tap into that constantly and to just feel that I'm up to date on all the information that is available. I find that to be suffocating, I suppose. It's much better to empty the mind than to fill it with information that is unusable in any real way. So I am aware of what's going on in the world. I don't isolate myself or tune out entirely. But I don't feel the need to constantly update myself. And yes, I don't watch television. Sometimes I'll listen to radio to talk radio to see what's happening, the news and what have you. But the information comes to you, and especially through the internet these days. And I keep abreast of what's going on as well.
Where do you live these days?
I live in New Hampshire.
What made you move from Sonoma over there?
There's a number of... I guess the primary reason for moving was that we needed space. We needed space with which to work. I wanted to build my own studio. I hadn't had my own setup since I left Minneapolis, and I really needed it at the house in which I lived in Sonoma. Did not even have room for a basic setup for writing things. So I needed some room to breathe. And at that time, I don't know what it's like now, but because the property was reported nightly on the news as it rocketed higher and higher, and I could just tell that there was no way we were going to find what we were looking for in the Bay Area. Sadly, because I love that part of the country. And through a series of wonderful coincidences and connections, we found out about this ashram that was not yet on the market in New Hampshire, and went to take a look at it. And it was a very unique property. Had a beautiful barn there, we're just waiting for conversion to use as a studio. And I decided just to take that leap, that it was important to have a basis from which to work. Considering the change of climate in the industry, I just knew that, if I was to part from Virgin, I wouldn't find that same security again. Nobody's going to take that leap of faith with me at this point in my life, and the kind of work that I'm doing in the current climate. So I needed a strong base. I needed my own setup. I needed to be entirely self-sufficient. Otherwise, it was highly likely I wouldn't be able to continue working as a musician. So that was the goal, to try and create an environment that was totally self-sufficient, where we had places for people to come stay with us, work, take their time developing ideas. We can rehearse there. We can rehearse the tours there. And we can create the artwork there. We can do everything. It's entirely self-sufficient, and that was essential, and that gave us our freedom.
Well, it's well known that Indian spiritual beliefs mean a great deal to you, and I'm curious if your interest extended to Indian classical music as well.
It does. I can't claim to be highly knowledgeable on the subject, but yes, it does. I mean, I play Indian classical music often, but I'm also extremely drawn to Indian devotional music, bhajan. That has been the greatest source of pleasure for me. And also just the basic reciting of Sanskrit. That is also something I find incredibly beautiful. So there's that. In a sense, I still feel like I'm a pupil learning about all of this culture as it comes into my life in different ways. But yes, it's something I'm drawn to, and hope to learn more about as time goes on.
What was the piece you performed during the encore of your last tour?
It was a song that I wrote for Sri Ma, having met her. I wrote a number of songs and poems for her when I met her in 97, I think that was. And that was one of those pieces. Actually, that's a very sweet set of songs because they're so filled with love for her. And I just pulled that one out. I thought it would work really well with the lineup, and I enjoyed performing.
Could you see yourself recording some of those tunes?
Yeah, I could. Yeah, I could in time. I'd like to, flesh the songbook out a bit. There's not enough there right now, but I like, the devotional song, devotional music. There's also the Sanskrit piece that I recorded for Camphor. Just the notion of taking that a step further would be of interest. If I feel it is right to do so. I mean, I recorded the Sanskrit piece because the piece meant a lot to me. It's a verse that I recite daily, so it's very much ingrained in my life. It's not something I flippantly had a crack at. So if I can find similar material that becomes very much a part of my life, and then find a means of expressing that through my own work, then that would be fascinating. There's an absence of new contemporary devotional music in a way, and that might be an interesting avenue to pursue in the future.
It could almost be said that some people do see your own music as something that has quite a healing element to it.
Well, I'd like to think so. That's the goal, really. It's healing for me to create work. It's always a wonderfully cathartic experience creating the work, and a wonderful release. And because of the way that I work, working with, I tend to have these images, these landscapes that sort of mirror certain emotional states when I'm creating the work, that give me a key as to where the work's leading. Having completed the work, it sort of reflects that same landscape back at me, and I'm of the belief that if I'm able to perceive that in my own work, somebody out there has got to be able to perceive the same intensity of emotions from it. And I think music can potentially give a listener that safe haven in which to open up to themselves. It's like the healing place. It's not a physical space. And music can sometimes envelop the listener and allow them to pour and delve into emotions that they might otherwise not feel capable of doing so. They may not feel safe to do so, but in the embrace of music, they can open up, breathe deeply into these emotions, be they celebratory, be they sad, melancholy, and just ride with them in the body of music. And I think that is such a potent healing capacity that maybe all the arts have, but the music in particular, that I really hope, that is, just absolutely the best response you can get, that somebody found in the work a capacity for healing themselves. I think that's beautiful. That's what it's all about.
The last time I spoke to you, we spoke extensively about your decision to remain in America, your perceptions of America, and I think we can both agree that things have gone steadily downhill since.
Yeah.
What keeps you here, given all of that?
Well, there's that difficulty, having set up a base, my children being born here, and being very happy where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Do I uproot this everything that we have prepared over the past 3 years, or and just follow my intuition, which is really to move back to Europe, or do I sit it out and just try and make a contribution? I have had friends that have left the country since Bush came to power, since the administration went on its kind of warmongering conquering of the oil states, and the temptation to leave because you felt that there was nothing in the administration that represented you, and that you truly I don't think I've ever had such negative feelings about an administration, whether in the UK or here, as I do for this one, because the level of greed, the level of wastefulness of human life, the environment, all the rest of it is so prevalent, and the motivation's so obvious. You don't have to be too sensitive to intuitive to see a fraction below the surface and then get a grasp of what's going on, and to be represented by such a power is just felt so abusive, I suppose, in a strange way, that this power, that these things were being done in your name. It felt really, I don't think I've ever felt so much anger towards that administration as I have towards this one. So, there really was a desire to try and back away from it. But that not being the case, having decided that isn't the right move to take, that there's reason to stay beyond what the government's doing here, really to try and make a contribution outside of that, and that's what I would try to do, and I try to be as vocal as I can about my opinions of what the government is doing. It's something I've avoided doing in the past because I didn't want the work to take on any kind of political overtones at all, because the work doesn't need that, and I don't think it's going to strengthen the work at all. So I've always kept political opinions to myself, but more so of late, and with Ruchi's encouragement, I have to say, because he invited me to get involved in more projects that were overtly political. I felt, I guess, more able, more comfortable in coming out and speaking about it.
I understand that your forthcoming tour is going to be a stripped-down affair with much of the music emanating from a laptop-based system.
Yeah.
Do you believe you can create an organic experience within that context?
I don't know yet. Right now it's an area of technology that I'm not that familiar with, and that's where the challenges lie. Steve and I will both have the material for Blemish on the laptops, and we're going to try and bring them alive in a way in a way that well, let's see. I mean, in a sense, it's trying to reinvent the material in the context of a live performance, retreating it, making additions to it, stripping it back, and just seeing how it develops night after night. And I guess it's a matter of how flexible the technology is. Well, that'll sort of define just how far we can go with the work. But the reason I decided to do it this way was because on listening to the material, listening to the finished album, I remember listening to it back with Steve, and he hadn't really heard the whole album at that point in time. And when it finished, we both had the impression that it was something like a monologue, And I felt that would be a nice way to present this, just one person seated and just, trying to pour the same emotion into the material once more and really putting it across just as a vocalist, as a monologue of some kind or another. And that's as the music became secondary. And I didn't want to try and recreate what I'd done. And let's face it, there's no way you can recreate what Derek did. Even Derek couldn't recreate what he did. So, but I wanted to perform that material. So it was a matter of taking what we had on disc and then adapting it and adding to it or whatever, or treating it, just seeing how far away from the original we can go, but still keep the spirit intact. I don't know what level of improvisation will be available to us each night. I'm just hoping that it will be significant enough to bring the work alive, not just for us, but for the audience as well. And there'll also be a filmmaker with us on stage who will be mixing images as we mix sound. So, it'll be very much, there'll be elements of the performance which are open to interpretation in the moment, night after night, and then there are obviously fixed elements. And I'm comfortable with that as long as I feel that there's enough variety, enough improvisation that the work remains alive, night after night.
Will you be performing non-Blemish material?
Yes. Yeah. And this will afford me the opportunity to work with material that I've been unable to perform live until now, because we'll take the same approach. We'll take the recorded element and then screw with it in the laptops and see what we can come up with. And so, that allows me access to material that I wouldn't have access to otherwise in the context of live performance.
What are some of those types of songs that you couldn't revisit previously?
Well, the ones that come to mind, pieces like Pop Song or Shining of Things, pieces that I tried Pop Song with the last lineup, and we came very close to pulling it off. But there are just certain pieces that I've always loved to perform live that we haven't been able to quite pull it off. I haven't actually gone and through the material and looked at it too closely, but there's a sense that there are a handful of numbers that I would like to get to grips with and mix the vocal compositions with pieces like Premonition and Approaching Silence, and basically mix all of these elements together so that a piece like The Shining of Things can be born out of elements that make up Approaching Silence, for example, just off the top of my head. And so there's an intermingling, there's a hybrid born from different elements.